So this happened on Halloween, when I was about 11. My friend and I decided to go trick-or-treating. Yeah, we were a little bit old, but we just wanted some free candy. I lived in a very nice neighborhood, one of the ones where everyone gives you a full-sized candy bar, so it wasn't unusual to have a lot of people come there to trick-or-treat. However, that also meant that there's about an acre of front yard for each house, so it took about 3 minutes to walk between each front door. It was a good night for Halloween weather-wise. Not too chilly, not too rainy or anything. This is important for later. It was approaching 8:30 p.m., and after hanging around on the golf course and appreciating our massive candy haul, we decided it was a good time to start heading home and call it a night. The street I live on is a gigantic U-shape, like just about a little over a half-mile walk from the top of the U down to the bend to the other side. We were walking towards the end of the U further from my house, as we wanted to take the long way since it was such a nice night out. It was around 9 p.m. now, so no one else was really out anymore at this point. People turned off their porch lights, the universal sign for no more trick-or-treaters. That's when we noticed, though, a lone white van parked on the street. We made a joke about how much it looked like the stereotypical kidnap vans with the painted windows. That's when we noticed it shift out of park and slowly creep down the street towards us and park at the next house over. Oh, they must have kids trick-or-treating. It wasn't uncommon for people to drive their kids from house to house, since they were so spread out in our neighborhood, but given that it was 9 p.m. and a night with nice weather, it struck us as a bit odd. We checked every few minutes, and it seemed to just be stopping from house to house like normal. We turned around again, and kept walking at a leisurely pace, gossiping and having fun and whatnot. And that's when we heard the car squeal as it moved forward down the hill and park again, this time only about 2 houses away from us on the opposite side of the street. Again, a weird time to trick-or-treat, but whatever. That was when we realized, though, there were no kids getting out of the van, not even once. Now this was before my first phone, a red and white Samsung Propel since it was 2008. We were only 15 minutes from my house, but a bit disturbed. We walked towards the nearest door, rang the bell, and stuck out our bags in an attempt to act normal. A woman opened the door just a crack and proceeded to berate us for trying to trick-or-treat at this late hour. She slammed the door before we could even say a word. Okay, thanks, lady. We turned around, and the van was now right there, parked in the wrong direction, on our side of the street. The windows were tinted, so we couldn't even see the person driving. Trying to keep our cool, we casually walk away from the door and up the street, into this cul-de-sac loop that's on the side of the street that makes up the bigger U. If you cut through that loop and hop a couple fences, you can end up right at my back door. The van followed us the same way. We now know he's following us, since there would be no reason for him to go up this side street otherwise. We break into a sprint, and I am by no means athletic, but I hop those fences like a damn Olympian. We run inside my house, lock all the doors, and freak out while we sit in the front hall. Not 5 minutes later, the van slowly coasts down the street right past my house. We stress-eat our candy and think of what could have happened if we hadn't been aware of our surroundings. This happened when I was in my early teens in the late 80s. My family lived in a very secluded, forested area. We had a long driveway, and our small home sat on a square acre of mowed grass with woods on either side. I was alone late one night, talking with a good buddy from school. I often rode my bike to town over the summer, and he invited me to come over and spend the night. It was a 20-mile trip over completely empty country roads, but it was always an adventure, and I seldom hesitated to go when I had a place to stay. I told him it was a sure thing. I'd call my mother at work and then start my ride. Here's where it gets creepy. Once I had hung up the phone and started getting dressed, I decided to wear all black. I picked up the phone again to call my mother. This time, though, the line was dead. This had never happened before. It was a fairly sturdy rotary phone, and we'd never had any problems with it. My thoughts instantly went to the small phone box on the back of the house. It was a tiny round junction with nothing but a rubber covering. Behind the cover was the exposed connection between the phone pole and our inside line. The wires were twisted together and capped, but completely vulnerable. I questioned why I would even think about that. Why would I jump to conclusions just because of a random dead line? I was overwhelmed with a sudden feeling of dread that didn't make sense, and I was trying to wrestle with my thoughts. I decided I'd behave as though I was in some real danger, but calm myself by focusing on just how unlikely it was. My imagination was probably just getting the best of me, but I just couldn't shake the feeling that somehow I was in trouble. I finished dressing up and strapped a buck knife to my hip, the old Rambo knives with the compass and the stock. It was cheap, but very big. I moved quietly and planned on how I would leave the house. I remember this very well. I would slide out the front door and pull it closed behind me, locked. I would not be able to get back in. I would grab my bike from against the wall on the enclosed porch, spin around, and use my elbow to press the button of the handle on the screen door and jump down the concrete steps. I'd hop on my bike and speed down the drive. It was very dark outside, but there were bright lights in the front and rear of the house that created big pools of light in the yard. That was all the light I would have. I executed my maneuver just as I'd planned, but my elbow slipped off the button on the handle and banged into the door as it opened. Within seconds, I was pumping down the gravel drive. I turned my head to the left, filling my ears with a roar of air as I was cutting through, and stopped pedaling, my eyes fixed on the rear of the house. I was 100% sure someone was coming. I don't know how or why. It was only a moment, but I didn't look away despite my own skepticism. And in the very last instant before I felt like I should turn away, I saw him. A man, wearing dark clothes and a ski mask, came tearing out of the lit yard around the back of the house and plunged into the deep shadow along the side, heading for the front, where I had been only seconds ago. I just happened to be invisible in the night, wearing black from head to toe, and instead of running straight for me, I guess he didn't see me. He went directly for the porch where the commotion I'd just made had come from. I turned forward and leaned into the pedals. I could barely see the driveway, but I had ridden my bike down it many times at night, and I could make out the large stone gate post before the dirt road. I almost wrecked turning the corner, but recovered and speeded away. About a mile further, and I finally stopped at the intersection to a paved road. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my forehead was sweaty. I stood there for a bit and got my breathing under control while I tried to digest what had just happened. My thoughts were racing. I knew damn well what I'd seen, but I was out of the danger. All I could do was press onward. My neighbors were Amish, so no phone there. I wouldn't have known what to say anyway. When I got to my friend's house much later, I told him what happened and called my mother. She listened and didn't give me a hard time, but I could tell she didn't quite know what to think. She wouldn't be home until morning and said she'd be careful, and that was it. I had heard laughter once from the edge of the woods, and things in the yard had been moved on occasion, but no one else had these experiences, and I always assumed it was backwards Amish kids just fooling around. Nothing had ever really happened before. I sincerely doubt any Amish kids would know how to disconnect a phone line, though. So this happened a couple of months ago, when I took my mum to a place in Europe for a quiet little week away, before I was having an operation. Nothing too serious, just my knee. I was still using one crutch because of this. We'd spent ages looking for a nice little hotel where we could relax and still be close to the town center of our destination, including looking at all the reviews we could find to make sure it would be a nice little getaway we both desperately needed. We get to the hotel and it's set off the street. We almost couldn't find it, as it wasn't visible from the main road. Up a driveway in what seemed to be a fairly residential area. No big deal. We'd be getting that relaxation in bucket loads if this area was residential. So, off we trot to explore and go for drinks and dinner. A lovely little place on the seafront, where we had lots of nice food and a bottle of wine. By the time we were done, though, it was already dark out. We were both knackered, so we started to head back to the hotel. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm pretty useless with getting my orientation in a new place. Usually I have to rely on Google Maps or City Mapper to get me anywhere. We were walking up the street and overshot the street where the hotel was by about 100 meters, so we stopped and decided to cross over at the pedestrian lights. All of a sudden, there was a man right next to us, looking fairly shady. As we cross over, we see him hanging around a woman on a corner. We later realized that yes, she was touting for business. Another guy appears out of nowhere. I stopped for a second to roll a cigarette, as Mum wasn't too happy about being that close to these guys. I happily obliged, as they were giving off strange vibes to me as well. My spidey senses were tingling all around. We carried on walking, and I noticed that they kept looking back at us. If I lifted off using my crutch, one of the guys would look around to see where we were. I told my mum to cross over to the other side, as that's usually a pretty good sign to tell if someone is potentially trying to follow or keep track of where you are. Again, they looked around and followed us. Now by this point, we were no more than 50 meters from the driveway entrance to the hotel, the only one on this street, and I rightly guessed they realized we were staying there. The second guy that appeared suddenly walked down a driveway next to our hotel, and the first one stopped, hanging around to see us walk past. At this point, I noticed the driveway to our hotel isn't lit, so neither me nor my mom are comfortable walking to the hotel whilst these two guys are hanging around it. You ever feel like you're being hunted? Well, that's exactly how I was feeling in that moment. I say to my mum in her native language for us to keep walking and see what happens. Suddenly, the guys speed up right next to us and start trying to figure out which language we're speaking. It ended up with, "Hey, want to come back to my place? We're having a party, just come back with us." I'm a female in my late 20s, and my mum is nearly 60. As you can probably tell, my gut feeling was telling me to note the fuck out of there ASAP. We turned down a street, and my mum was totally panicking about how we're going to get back into the hotel if they're still hanging around. I had a feeling, though, these guys were fairly opportunistic and wouldn't wait around, as I'd made sure we didn't make it look like we were going anywhere but forwards, just ignoring them. A half an hour later, we walk up a main road that's a little better lit and get to the turning of our hotel street. In addition to seeing an additional 3 ladies looking to make their money that night, out of the corner of my eye, I spot the first man waiting around. Fuck, that's all I can think. I told my mom to speed up, despite not being able to run. I assure you, though, I had my crutch at the ready to start swinging if they came after us. All of a sudden, the first man starts whistling to his friend, signaling that we were back. Cue speed walking as fast as my dodgy knee can carry me, and punching the hotel gate code in as fast as possible. We pretty much didn't so much as breathe until we finally made it into the lobby. The night manager greets us, and we retell our story, with my mum visibly shaking, the poor woman. We get told, "Nothing like that has ever happened around here before." Yeah, right, mate. We saw 4 prostitutes and the streets are deserted. At least acknowledge this happened instead of brushing it off. In hindsight, we should have just called the emergency line for that country, but as we couldn't prove they were doing anything, we didn't think it would make much of a difference. The rest of the week, we just ate big lunches out, and then as soon as it started getting dark, we chilled in the hotel room with snacks and wine and films, instead of going out. This is truly the scariest, most horrible thing that's ever happened to me. I've never been so petrified in my entire life. Even to this day, I still don't know who this man was, what he was trying to do, or if he still is where I first saw him. Also, I'm sorry for how long the geographical description is. I just want everyone to understand just how secluded I was when this all happened, and how badly it could have all ended if it wasn't for my parents. I was back home for the summer for the first time in nearly a year after starting uni. Our home was, and still is, just outside of a small town, with forests all around. There was also a small man-made lake, which was diverged from a river that ran for miles through the forest, and ramified into a few streams east of the lake. Near my home, there was a small grassy path that led to the river following a stream. It was a long walk, but one I used to go on often as a child. I knew the forests around here very well. I knew where I could cut through dense trees to meet the stream. The walk I would go on always led me off the path, which turned northwest slowly, so away from the stream, and then took a sharp turn to the west after a few miles of walking. At that point, the stream was hidden quite deeply into the forest. I continued to walk north and followed the stream through the forest to get to the river, then followed the river out west to get to the lake. It's very easy to get lost because the terrain isn't just a slope down to the water. It goes up and down and crests over hills, and you eventually end up completely surrounded by trees. I'd spent many days wandering around there alone, or with my dad over the span of 18 years, and never once had I seen anybody else in that forest. I went there twice that summer, both times alone-ish. The first time I left in the morning, I walked along the path away from the stream to the sharp bend, then cut back into the forest. I managed to reach the stream after only an hour or so. As I was running my hands in the water, I heard a bell from far away, the sound coming from the north. Something was making a bell ring fervently and periodically, which I found very strange. I listened well. I wondered if maybe it was a lost hunting dog, and I started to move towards the sound. Yeah, I bloody know I'd be the first person to die, but I was heading north anyway, so what the hell? At that point, I realized it couldn't have been an animal. I could tell the bell was too heavy because of how clear the sound was to be on a collar. I kept moving, and the bell was moving away from me. It stopped completely after 5 minutes. I knew that the stream wasn't big or strong enough to carry something like a bell trapped in a tin that could make that noise, and the river was far too still. I tried to think of everything, but nothing could explain the sound, apart from one obvious thing, which I just didn't feel comfortable with for some reason. I knew it had to have been a person. I stopped thinking about it though, and just went on my normal way. That was until I found a badger, a bloomin' dead one, carefully decapitated. It had obviously been done with a knife. It was fairly fresh, the body was still limp, and there wasn't too much smell coming from it. The wound was full of maggots, but I knew that happened soon after exposure. The sound of the bell had been following the stream, and so had I. The badger was put there, maybe killed there, at least decapitated, while I was walking that way. I suppose. I don't know, really. Thankfully, nothing else happened that day. 1 week later, I went back for the second time that summer, and the last time ever. I left home at about 6 p.m. that night. I'd made it to the stream and then walked to the river in an hour, then decided to go back the way I came, because it was getting quite late, and it was starting to rain really heavily. The sun had set at around 9 p.m. I was walking as fast as I could. The sound of the rain in the trees was surreal and loud. I was somewhat trotting with my head down for a while, through the clearest and most open part of the forest, when I bumped into something heavy. The smell was sickly. It was the decomposing body of the badger, with his head strung to his front paws. That area looked a bit like a ham because of the way it was tied, just swinging from a tree, almost like a literal load of bollocks. It was a putrid bag of stench, wet and dripping with green liquid. I started to gag. I had some sort of mucus-textured fluid stuck in my hair. It was completely repulsive feeling. At first, I just stared at it, slightly gobsmacked. Then I started fidgeting violently because I felt like I was drenched in the juices. I was soaking from the rain, and my senses became confused. It felt like a bucket of ice-cold water had been thrown over me when I realized that I walked the same way to get to the river. So someone had strung up the body after I'd passed it on the way there. Someone who knew I'd see it. Was someone watching me and running around the forest? Were the faint sounds of branches breaking around me not just animals? I looked around and started jogging. I was half running and half walking away from the stream, back towards the path for a while, when I began to hear the bell once again. I proceeded to call my dad while running. I told him to meet me on the path where it sharply turns west. It was the closest part to me, to go as fast as he could, and that someone was with me in the forest. I can't quite explain the feeling I had. It was like I just shit out my intestines and stomach. I could literally feel the hairs on my neck raise, despite being completely soaked. It was dark. I jogged as fast as I could. I was panicking, because the path was still a bit far away. Just too far to feel safe. Because of the rain, every single sound around me was muffled. I felt like everything was further away than ever before. The bell went on way longer than the last time, on and off. It felt like it was surrounding me at one point. The fear, combined with my compromised hearing, and the fact that I couldn't breathe properly, was making me slightly lose my sense of direction. I was automatically heading southwest, but I wasn't really sure what the flip I was even doing. I was breathing like a goddamn horse, coughing my lungs up, kind of crying out loud like a toddler does, tripping over leaves and twigs like an idiot. I stayed on the phone with my mom, who was on her way with my dad. I kept hearing these sounds around me, but I wasn't sure what they were. My mom was screaming on the phone at the same time that they were on the path, that I needed to run, that my dad had gotten out and was heading east from the path bend. I was so terrified that I went into survival mode. At this point I slowed down because I was beginning to run out of breath. Then, I heard branches break, clear footsteps, for the first time from down in the forest. The bell began to ring louder. I didn't want to, but I turned and looked over my shoulder. That's when I saw what was in the forest with me. A tall figure, creeping in my direction at the very end of the clearing, ringing this bell slowly in front of his stomach. I could tell he was staring straight at me. I don't know if I had a hidden secret sprinting ability, or if it was instinctual adrenaline-induced superhuman powers, but when I tell you I ran for my life, I didn't look back once. I screamed as loud as I could. I lied. I'm on the phone with the police. They're on the path already. Dad, I can see you. I'm here. I wanted to yell out, "Where are you?" But I kept that to myself. I felt like something awful was going to happen. I felt like the man was right behind me. I kept telling myself not to look back. I was gasping, wheezing, crying and screaming for my dad. I felt shivers on my neck, and then switched off. I just ran. At some point I even dropped my bag, and I only realized I didn't have it anymore when I had reached the car. I felt like my phone was my only way home. Everything no longer felt real. It was like my legs were moving by themselves. I didn't know if the man was still following me. I could only hear my heart beating in my ears, and the sound of the bell approaching from behind. I finally heard my dad shout out my name, and I knew he was coming my way and that he could see me because of the intonation in his voice. I pretty much lunged myself at him when we got to each other. My dad could hear the bell too. My mom could hear it over the phone. She was waiting with the car ready to leave in an instant. We went directly to the police station and I got medical attention soon after. My dad burst into tears in the car. He said that the entire time he could hear the bell and he thought he wouldn't be able to see me. He asked himself, what if I didn't have my phone? What if he hadn't picked up? They were almost as terrified as me. because they had been witness to everything through the call. They could hear me running. They could hear the danger. They just couldn't see it. The police, of course, couldn't really do much. They searched the area, and the only thing they found was a folded t-shirt placed under a rock. My bag was not recovered. They said it was probably some homeless man living in the forest, but failed to realize what could have happened if my dad didn't know that part of the forest like I did, and exactly where to find me. I'm not blaming anyone, of course. The entire thing was my fault. There are just so many what-ifs. I want to believe it was just someone who decided to live in the woods and hunt or something. Maybe they were a bit mentally unstable, and they felt angry that I came into their territory. But what if it was something more insidious? The way the man moved towards me was abnormal. It was perverse, because of how slowly and deliberately he was ringing the bell. It was like he had me trapped. I didn't see any more detail. I just ran. To this day, I can't bloody go anywhere where I'll be alone, and the sounds of bells is a real problem. The smell of moss as well. Anyway, my parents and Steve Jobs saved my life, so go hug yours right now, and take decapitated badgers and bells as pagan signs that you're unwelcome.